We are here today to talk about the power of belonging and specifically how we can foster more peer connection and engagement for our online and non-traditional students. We are recording the session today, so everybody will receive a copy of that when we're done. But we're really glad that you were able to be with us here live because we have an amazing set of panelists. In fact, they're so great that we're going to try to wrap the webinar a little bit early and then move over into what we call our networking lounge. So it's another virtual tool that we'll post the link to at the end of this conversation. But what's great about there is you can come in, you can actually talk live to Luke and Janelle, who will introduce themselves in a second, ask any follow-up questions that you had and just keep the conversation going. So look for that at the end of the webinar today. I am Katie Kapler. I will be our moderator today. So I am the co-founder and CEO of Inscribe, which is a virtual community platform. I'll give you a brief introduction on that in a minute. I am also joined today by Danielle Bonner, who is going to be helping moderate the chat and the conversation as it comes through. If you've attended one of our webinars before, you know that Danielle has full authority to interrupt us at any time. In fact, we encourage her to do so that we can weave your questions and comments into the conversation as we go. I'm also joined today by two amazing panelists, Dr. Luke Dowden and Janelle Elias, which I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and talk a little bit just about their role and the institutions that they're from. So, Luke, why don't you start?
Hey, it's great to be with you today. I'm Luke Dowden. I'm the Chief Online Learning Officer at the Alamo Colleges District. I have the honor of working with 5 independently accredited community colleges. They're all Hispanic serving institutions. One is also a historically Black college, the only institution to hold both designations in the entire United States. We're located in San Antonio, Texas, where our moonshot is ending poverty through education. We are the 7th largest city in the United States, and a lot of people don't realize that. We're large geographically and a large population center. So lots of online learners to serve and lots of considerations around belonging and connectedness. And I'm happy to share some time today with you, Katie, and my good friend, Janelle.
Awesome. Great to have you, Luke. As always, I'm super excited to share your story and some of the vision that you're bringing to your institutions. Janelle, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Katie. Good morning, everyone. I'm super excited to be here and joined by Dr. Dowden today. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Advancement at Rio Salado College. We're a public 2-year institution, one of 10 Maricopa community colleges. I see a lot of people from Rio Salado College online today, so thanks for joining us. We're located here in Tempe, Arizona, Maricopa County, as I indicated. Rio was designed as a college without walls, so we primarily serve online learners, and we also serve prisons, adult education around our system, dual enrollment. And so we were designed to provide innovative distance education. About more than half of our students are first-generation college students. We are also a Hispanic serving institution. We tend to serve an older demographic and a very diverse demographic. And we've been working with Inscribe now, 3 years? So I'm really excited to share our learnings and where we're headed with this great work. But thanks for having me here today.
Absolutely. So excited to have you as well, Janelle. And yes, I feel like now you're like old school with the Inscribe team, and it's been fun to watch the evolution of your strategy and to have the outcomes that we can talk about today. So I'm super excited to share that as well. Now, I know you guys did a lot of introductions in the chat. I saw all those coming in when we jumped in. So we've probably shared some of this information already, but we'd love to know, it's always good to get a sense of who do we have in our audience. So if you pull up your Slido and just mention kind of what your primary role is at your institution, we can get a little bit of a sense of the mix that we have. And always good because as we will talk about later in this conversation, belonging is not necessarily something owned by a single organization at an institution, but it's often, a responsibility that's shared across many groups and departments. So, I mean, this is great. We have a good mix. I feel like other is pretty high. We're probably missing some categories that we should have included in there. But love to see the diversity of attendees that we have. If you've mentioned other and you want to throw in the chat what your role is, please do so, and we'll make sure we capture that next time
I see a couple like department chairs, Katie.
Yes.
Let's see.
There's an oversee. Sorry, go ahead, Danielle.
You go for it.
I was just gonna say, like, overseeing all kinds of things, right? Then you're
Right.
touching on all of these areas for sure. Wonderful. I don't know if the poll will stay open if I move away. I'm learning a little bit about Slido, so you guys are part of our guinea pigs for today, but thank you so much for contributing. So what I would like to do, I did say I was going to tell you a little bit about Inscribe. So just to set the context, because I do think Inscribe will come up in the conversation today, and so you kind of understand who we are and where we fit in this landscape of student connection and belonging. If you're not familiar, we're a virtual community platform. So we partner with institutions to create digital spaces where students can connect with each other, sometimes with faculty and staff, but essentially to give them a highly flexible, on-demand place that they can turn to anytime they need help, they need advice, they just want to reach out and know that somebody else is there. So we focus on a lot of outcomes through our communities, including things like improving outcomes, giving students a voice, but we're also very focused on these concepts of belonging and peer connection, which can be particularly challenging for online and non-traditional students who don't have the luxury, of being on campus, of 4 years in a dorm, with my other fellow students. So how do we create the opportunities for them to have those same connections and conversations that, an on-campus student might just get by default? So that's a lot of our work, and that context I think will help as we kind of move into the conversation today. So one more question for you guys. So when you think about, and I don't know how many of you are actually serving online and non-traditional students, I'm sure many of you are, but when you think about that, what are, 1 or 2 words that would come to mind when you think about the challenges that these populations of learners are facing? We'll let it sit for a minute. And my panelists are also welcome to jump in and provide some answers if they want to. Time management, yes, for sure. Family, connection, family, because we know that a lot of times they're balancing family while they're learning, which can be, I feel like we all understand how stressful that can be managing. So engagement, connection, big words that are coming up. Motivation, which I see there, I know it's small, but it's something we've heard a lot of, especially since the pandemic, this idea of how do I stay motivated when I'm learning alone and not around my peers. I don't know, Janelle or Luke, if anything jumps out to you here.
The loneliness and isolated, I think, are significant. We'll get into these topics a little bit later on. The one that I didn't see is confidence, right? I think there are a lot of learners that are struggling with their confidence, and sometimes we need to be aware of spaces where they can gain validation. Like, yes, you can learn. Yes, you do have the capacity. Yeah. Right. Those are things that I experienced and I witnessed. So that, I don't know about you, Janelle, but like the word loneliness, I connected with that.
Yeah, isolation is one that comes to mind. So as a former online learner, we've worked in online education for decades. It can be pretty isolating to be going it alone and have the self-discipline to do all your assignments when someone's not having that structure of time and space. So we'll talk more about those challenges at Rio and some of the strategies we're using to try to build connection and peer connectedness.
We also have imposter syndrome come in through the chat.
So, yeah. Oh, yes. Right. To Luke's point, tied to that confidence thing. The other thing that strikes me about this is there's a lot of different things on this, slide. Like, so when we think about this population of students, there's probably some of these challenges that are shared by we call more traditional student population, but a lot of things that are really unique to this group. And so how do we really support them and help them persist when they are having to overcome a lot of additional things? So that brings us right into our first question. And we're actually going to sit with this question for a while, because what I would really love the panelists to do is to talk about the question on the screen. What is it about sense of belonging why did that rise to a priority for you? What are you hearing from your students? But in the answering that question, it would be great if you could also describe, I know Janelle, you did a bit in your introduction, but like a little bit about your population of learners and how these things are connected. So Janelle, why don't you take this one first and lead us off?
Thank you. Yeah, as I indicated, Rio Salado College was designed to be a distance learner provider. So we've been online since the late 90s, and we have an online asynchronous model. So it's highly individualized, creates great flexibility. It's a great solution for the working adult, or as we learned in the prior poll, the adult that has a lot of competing demands on their time. So we have, again, that asynchronous model, which could also be quite isolating because there's not team level assignments. There's not as much peer-to-peer synchronous work at all built into our teaching and learning model. We serve about 35,000 students annually at Rio Salado College. And this is pre-COVID too, that the majority of our learners were doing that online asynchronous model. So what was happening at Rio, we were hearing from student feedback in surveys and alumni surveys that they wanted a greater sense of connection among peers. Students wanted more interaction and engagement with their own peers, and that is not how our model is designed to provide incredible personalized flexibility. A student in a Rio course could take it for a 16-week version, a 14-week version, an 8-week version, and so each student's kind of on a personal semester to complete the course competencies. And so we responded to that by exploring virtual community platforms out there. And I want to say we did this prior to COVID as well, but it was really timely because obviously that landscape has shifted and the demands have increased for us to provide these wraparound supports to online learners even more after COVID. So pre-COVID, we didn't have a lot of foot traffic on our campus here in Tempe, Arizona, and we are a national community college. So we have students all across the country completing online certificates and degrees. And so listening to their voice, making sure we were paying attention to that opportunity to increase engagement. We also made it part of our strategic plan. I wanted to note that we did some deep work at our institution prior to COVID to prioritize a culture of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as part of our strategic goals since 2020. And that helped us to do that internally. So we were providing our staff and faculty with the skill sets and knowledge base to be able to create a culture of belonging and inclusion, but also really being able to respond to what the students were saying. So I'll share that we did use student data. We engaged students in a pilot. I hope to explore more of that with us. But we actually had student leaders contribute to a pilot that we used in Scribe at that time to test a virtual community platform that would enable a virtual student union, essentially, that could wrap around the courses and allow students to congregate virtually. And I'd love to share more about what we're learning. But for example, we have, I would say 15,000 average monthly active members right now in our virtual community. So part of what we're doing is we're helping students feel seen. We're helping students identify themselves in the digital world. And that's an important part of them, having that authentic self here at an online institution and help them understand they're not alone. So we see a lot of students introducing themselves in this virtual community and finding affinity groups in there, not only related to their disciplines of study, but also to their lifestyles and to all the roles that we carry as online learners. So I'll pause there and give the mic over to Luke, but then I look forward to discussing this greater. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Janelle. Just to give you an idea of our size, across our 5 colleges last fall, there were 16,363 students learning completely online. Now that's in one of 2 modalities, right? Either completely asynchronous or synchronous like we're experiencing today. So, but quite a large group of learners. The majority of those are in our district, but we do have a healthy number, close to about 2,500 that are outside of our district and across the nation. So I'm sure your footprint's a little bit bigger nationally, Janelle, but we're very much Texas based. What I would say though is we've got 85 plus certificates and associate's degrees that are fully online, right? So a student can choose to learn in those programs completely online. And we, right before COVID, Katie, had done this survey called the Priority Survey of Online Learners. And what I like about it is that it has a measure of importance and a measure of satisfaction. And how far those things are apart suggests it's a strength or a challenge, right? So we ran that January 2020. We ran it again in January 2022. We're getting ready to run it again in January 24, right? So we've got some consistent data. But one of the things that we noticed in that study is we were looking for things that were we were looking for things that were successes, so we could share that, things that were challenges, so we could work internally. But what about the things that were neither? And there are two areas that evidence consistently showed. And one of them was, I'm aware of whom to contact for questions about programs and services. It was neither a strength or a challenge. We said, is there an opportunity there? At the same time, we were doing some work on a national grant with some partners at Achieving the Dream called Prioritizing Adult Community College Engagement. So we were collecting stories, we were listening to our learners. So we had the quantitative and the qualitative data that said, you know, I think that we should lean into this. And then I was sitting in Phoenix, Arizona in March at the League of Innovations in Community Colleges, and EAB showed data on mental health of students. And it showed the change from fall 20 to fall 21 of community college and four-year university students. And it got worse. And if I could be a little vulnerable with you, because that's my superpower and I'll lean into it, is that one of my sons was in that data. He had experienced that. And that hit me to my core. So I took that personal experience, what we had been listening to our learners, said, you know, we need to really lean into this and think about this. And as you know, Katie, we started to engage you and other vendors and to evaluate the opportunities to really create a sense of community among our online learners. So we're not where Janelle is, right? We're at the beginning of our journey with you, but there's a real body of knowledge, I would say, a body of interest, and it's core to Alamo, right? Alamo is very much about what can we wrap around the students? Okay, what else can we wrap around the students? Okay, what else can we wrap around the students, right? Because the majority of our learners are first-generation college students, and majority Hispanic, and especially of our online learners. The other thing that we were doing is we got very deep into studying students who were leaving because we want to change that behavior. So we becoming experts of our own students. So I would say, you know, why we made it a priority, because we want people to complete. And there are some state metrics around that, but it's really more about our core values. And then in terms of student voices, I would say very much. And I hopefully provided you some ways that we were collecting that data.
I mean, so many wonderful notes in there that I wanted to touch on. First of all, Luke, thank you for sharing, you know, your story with us. And I think many people on this webinar have also some sort of personal connection to that statistic that you talked about during and post-COVID, and those feelings of sort of decrease in mental health, isolation, and the impact of that on themselves or their students or their family. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I also, Janelle, love that you brought up, because I think this is something people struggle with, that maybe there was a belief that there's a tension between creating total flexibility and personalization for these learners, but also having ways for them to connect with students, that like somehow those are at odds. But I love that how you have overcome that by creating your space, which is totally flexible, on demand, come when you want, student created, student driven. So it really reflects their desires in this area without interfering with their ability to have a very personalized, highly flexible learning experience. So I am actually curious with the audience, you know, because I do think sense of belonging is a topic that has become more prevalent in our narrative and our conversation, especially since COVID, and I think very reflected in what Luke and Janelle just shared. So I'm curious how your institution is thinking. Oop, I muted myself. Additional poll here. You know, sort of think about your institution or your department or your college, and how are you all thinking about this idea of student sense of belonging and the need to potentially increase it or provide new initiatives around it. And I have, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I really appreciate what Lick said. We also do the PSOL. So I know there's some chat about that. That would be a great resource for online programming and online institutions. So I wanted to +1 that comment. And then also underscore what he's saying about, we got laser focused on course completion, persistence between courses, and also, student outcomes. So we went from a paradigm that was way more focused on inputs or enrollment and access to now this paradigm shift of how do we get students to persist and complete, and we're finding that creating this wraparound support is really part of that recipe. And so I just wanted to underscore that's been part of our journey too. Those same tools and resources were used. And I think hopefully we can talk a little bit more about defining the concept of belonging, because I think that's a part of how do you know where to start. And that was a big part of the foundational work we had to do, was understand what that meant to our stakeholder groups, to our students who were online, so we could deliver something that was meaningful and relevant.
That's all. And that's a great point, Janelle. We should have started this with a definition of sense of belonging, which I'll touch on in a second. And I also appreciate people jumping in on this. I would say, I do think it can sometimes feel overwhelming when you're trying to figure out where to start. If for those of you who already have initiatives underway, if you're willing to just share in the chat what you're doing around this space, I think that can be really helpful for your colleagues. I also would encourage people to think that there's not necessarily one silver bullet for this, and you don't have to solve all the problems all at once. So figuring out what's one thing I could do to start down this path, see how it goes, how do I add about, and that was kind of what Luke was saying, right? Like, how do we wrap around services? Okay, then what else do we wrap around? And then what else do we wrap around? So you don't have to get from 0 to 10 all in one go to add value and to add opportunity for your learners. In terms of sense of belonging, I used to have a really good definition, but I think the sort of standard definition, unless somebody wants to look it up for me, that'd be great too, is feeling appreciated, supported, and welcomed by your community, and that you have value to that set of individuals. So one important thing about sense of belonging that a good colleague of mine always emphasizes is you cannot tell somebody that they belong. It's not something that you can impose upon somebody. It really is something that has to come from inside of them. And in certain cases, their feeling about how they belong may not actually align with whether they are welcome at an institution, but it's really about their self-perception and how we can influence that. Okay, so sorry, yes, Danielle?
A couple of questions in the chat here. And this is directed towards both Luke and Janelle, because I think your inscribed communities are different, but can you share how you've structured your inscribed communities? Is it a completely open, everyone can join, or is it connected to certain classes or affinity groups? What do your communities look like?
So I would say this. I thought a lot about this, and I took one of the days we were given off because we work at a very great organization that offers a lot of good benefits, and one are paid holidays. But I took one to read the case studies from Inscribe, and I would say start there. There's one on WGU. I think there's one on Rio, and there's one on Fort Hays State University. I think that I have that right. Those are really good resources. Like they're different use cases. And one of my colleagues is on the call. One of the things we're doing is going to embed this into our orientation to online learning as an entry point, right? So I would start to think about what are the entry points. And to Katie's point, I love this not imposing, right? Because that's not what we want. So we're going to open it up originally, and that's where we're going to start in September. So we're, again, right at the beginning of the journey, but I'll tell you that we did our homework. And I liked that there were case studies that had different value propositions and different reasons. And again, I'll stop there because Janelle's got a lot more experience and she's further down the road. But I would just go to those case studies because I felt that they were very informative. They weren't, and I would say this, Katie, whether I was on this webinar or not, they weren't selling the product. They were really talking about how they situated it in their culture and context of their organizations. And I liked the authenticity of that. So I would just say that.
Thank-
Awesome. Danielle is looking those up for the participants right now to put them in the chat.
Yes, it's in the chat. Links in the chat. Check them out.
That's great advice. And we also got inspired by different use cases. I think what was unique about the platform was it's a vehicle. It's not the end in and of itself. And that was kind of hard to wrap your mind around at first, because you have to get really clear on your use cases, which is why we engage student leaders. So we made this like a college project with our Phi Theta Kappa honor students, and they helped us look at the different use cases. And where we started was an open community where we add all students every semester. And then we had student moderators, and we truly had a challenge of staying out and letting the students connect with one another. And yet we could have visibility into it. And we used some of the tools like sentiment analysis to tell us if there was any distressing remarks. We really let the students engage one another. And that created, you'll see in our research, this sense of pure connectedness. But that was where we started, and it wasn't where I expected to start. Was a very basic global student virtual union. Where we've evolved to and what my academic interests were, we're also creating virtual learning communities to support our meta majors as part of our guided pathways. So, we have these fields of study, and I had really envisioned the faculty and the marketing team and employers and even transfer institutions wrapping around learners and providing a lot more contextualized content and engagement and interaction to keep them future focused on how their academic pathways would lead to their transfer or occupational goals, right? Career goals. So that word contextual is really important. Today, we have multiple communities. We have this global community called Rio Connect, where all online learners are added, and it's very much opt-in or opt-out. They can engage or not. There's no consequences, but we find a lot of students go there for wayfinding, to form study groups, to introduce themselves. And I think that was pretty smart. What we did was we branded it with student voice too. We let the students at the college, the online learners, and our social media help determine a name for this community so they could truly feel like it was their space designed by peers, right? That is our first initiative that's been underway for more than a year now. But now we're moving into these, what we call field of interest communities that are more discipline specific, and they have dedicated advisors, faculty are in there, and we're even having employers and transfer universities, like I indicated, coming with more specific contextualization around a career interest. A few other use cases, we do also apply the community inside of specific courses. I think ASU inspired this idea for us, that we use it for co-curricular support for math tutoring, for example. So when students are in these entry-level math courses, we put that Rio Connect community there, and they have a virtual community where they can, all the students who are in that particular course can connect across sections at any given time. And then we do have co-curricular groups like honors, PTK, et cetera, using it again to engage as a platform. So rather than using Slack or another platform, they're relying on Inscribe. So at this point in our evolution, we have about 3 to 4 different use cases. I still also want to get to where WGU was using it with wayfinding for prospective students. And that's a really cool opportunity for us to explore next in our evolution.
And I would
Wonderful.
I'm sorry, Katie.
No, go ahead, Luke.
I would like to see us move into the academic space as well. I mean, this idea of everyone taking college algebra, being in a group where they can help each other. I like that. And I like that value proposition. It's not where we're going to start, right? But that's really where I hope we end up in the roadmap as we learn more. And that the other thing Janelle and I didn't talk about, and I want to also be mindful to the other questions and comments that we have coming in, is like what we're going to learn from the system, right? So I think that there's a lot of intelligence to be learned from the system, like who's interacting around what questions. So, is that where can we be more targeted in the services and support we provide by how we use the data from the engagement inside of the system? And that's the other added value, Katie's, right? It's not only connected, belonging, connectedness, but how do I get more targeted in an area that we may not even think or know is a weakness? that we need to turn into a strength. So anyway, that's the other kind of hope that I have.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And we always say when you just let students talk to each other, you will be surprised how much you can learn. I mean, you maybe wouldn't be surprised, but you can learn so much about what they're really thinking about, excited about, worried about, struggling with. And then that, to your point, like, is such great context to think about other opportunities around the institution where you can make change. And Janelle, of course, I love that you have so many use cases, and that is fairly common, that will start in a certain area with an institution and then build additional communities that might have slightly different goals and focuses. But make no mistake, if you build a community for students around college algebra, for example, that community is also, we have found, touching on these ideas of belonging and student connection. And they tend to get right at that like imposter syndrome issue, because if you think you're the only one that doesn't get something, and then 5 other students ask that same question in a public space in a community, like, that's huge for you in terms of, you know, building your confidence and feeling like, all right, I'm not the only one, and we're kind of in this together. So I love those use cases as well. And I was actually going to have you guys, and so thanks everybody for contributing. I should ask you, Danielle, is there another question in the chat that you want us to touch on, or should I move ahead?
Not at this moment in time.
Okay, perfect. So I was going to have you guys talk about your implementation here, but I love that you already did it. So we can really focus on this question, which is, you know, whose responsibility is it? You know, you have, and we saw in the first slide, right? We have student services, academic services, faculty, department chairs. Like, how do you think about ownership of this issue, and like, and how do you bring everybody into the fold? So, who wants to start?
Janelle?
Go ahead, Luke. I'll follow you.
So, you know, I think if it's everyone's responsibility, it's no one's. And I think in Janelle and I's role, and this, I was hoping we would get into kind of a conversation about this, Janelle, like, strategically, we have to create the opportunity. And I think that's the engagement with the tool is about creating the opportunity. Pick our entry point. We talked about that, right? Like, thinking about what's our entry point, and then give it room and time to grow and breathe and adapt and introduce others. I mean, we're really talking about change management, right? And we've done this successfully with micro credentials, and we've done it with other initiatives, is that you have to create good examples. You have to share it internally. You have to share it again, right? And the student engagement piece, Janelle, I love your examples of how you've engaged students in so many ways, even in branding the experience of Rio Connect. So I think there's levels of responsibility. When we were vetting tools, one of our first year experience group from one of our colleges came and said, we see a use case for this, right? Another one of our leaders that works with faculty and provides instructional design services said, I actually think there's an opportunity for faculty with the tool, though it's a student tool, right? I think there is a place because of the community, right? And people seeking community. So I just want to talk about the responsibility from a change management and a strategy standpoint, because I think you want to bring others along, right? And people are ready to adopt different tools at different times. And I think as leaders, and Janelle and I both are, it's our responsibility to make sure the opportunity is there for when someone needs it, right? Whatever that use case may be. And that's just kind of how I've been thinking about this question. I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer, but Janelle, I don't know if you have any reaction to that.
Well, you stole my answer actually, because I was going to say a part of it is that it's everyone's responsibility. But then when we say that, like, who owns it? So this idea of creating ownership was a challenge, to your point. And we followed change management methodologies as well. We spent a lot of time awareness building. And I couldn't think of a better ambassador on the front end than student leaders, because we're all going to respect the voice of the students. So making sure student voices are part of the creation of the space is very powerful for us. And then, as you can imagine, it's very cross-functional work. So I think maybe historically we might believe this is student affairs work, or that's the faculty in the classroom. But now we're talking around how do we all create a very student-centric online experience that we all are talking in support of the learners. And we're actually collaborating across silos and really doing boundary spanning work, excuse me. So what we did is we, in addition to having a more focused student-driven project, we also started creating a ton of awareness with a bunch of different stakeholders all throughout the curriculum life cycle and in all different angles, even the marketing team, everyone from the marketing team to the alumni leaders. Like we looked at the whole student life cycle. Out of this work, we even learned that we could benefit from creating a cross-functional student digital experience committee. So that was one outgrowth of this journey, was now we have a cross-functional standing group that's part of our shared governance. So we're more seriously and holistically looking at technology interfaces that can create belonging for students along the full life cycle, because each part or each function of the institution is doing their part. But if you really view it from the student lens, you might see that it's not a very seamless experience. So having a virtual community like this allowed us to create the sense of a wraparound seamless experience between classes, between instructors, and even as students might shift from one program to another. We have field of interest advisors, so they've been engaging more in this space. But what we had to do is really think about the need for a product owner. And we had never had product owners as a community college. That was a real challenge to create an ongoing strategy and roadmap, to your point, Luke. Like, no one wanted to take on that extra hat. So we had to carve out, what is that? We actually hired an intern who was getting a graduate degree in ed technology. And they helped us understand what are the gaps in understanding how to create a roadmap around a product like this and to have that holistic viewpoint. So that intern helped us scope a product owner role. We were able to document SOPs and different roles around the use of the virtual community. And also we were able to mitigate the fear that this is going to be a ton of work. I think that was another risk that we had to overcome, or misunderstanding. People were scared, like, what am I signing up for? I already have initiative fatigue. COVID was very taxing on everyone. And so when we could tell them after some analysis that this literally takes 10 minutes a week, and then they would be more likely to experiment and to try. So 3 years in, now we have like a line of people coming to us saying, how can we do this in the community? How can we do X, Y, Z in the community? And we're really grateful that we did some of that grounding, product ownership, roles and responsibilities, scoping it out as it pertains to this particular virtual community. But what we're seeing is the reorganization of our college to also mirror a much more student-centric experience, which is part of guided pathways, and that is part of our journey. And so one other thing I'll offer is all that foundational work some awareness and desire and training had to take place. And we talked about our strategic direction. We provided training and shared mental models around what these words meant at our institution, engaged shared governance in that process, to really cultivate the conditions for belonging, because we can't tell someone they belong. We just can teach people how to cultivate an inclusive culture and create the conditions for belonging. So really interesting.
Amazing. I mean, and I think you guys both nailed it. Luke, were you gonna add something? You
No,
came
I
off
was,
mute, so I didn't know.
Janelle said something that sparked some responses to the next questions.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so I mean, change management is always a thing. I love that you touched on, overcoming fears and objections that will not manifest, but it's hard to sort of prove that negative for people at the beginning. And so I really appreciate all that foundational work that you did, Janelle, and I'm sure everyone on this webinar would love to learn from the process with you. So I would like to shift our focus a little bit. We sort of talked about why we're doing this and how you're doing it, but now I'd like to talk about, like, how do we know if it's working and is it actually making change for your learners? And I know, Janelle and Luke, you guys are at very different points in this journey. So Janelle, if you could share a little bit about the actual research that you guys have done, and then Luke, maybe talk about looking forward, what are some of the measures you want to be tracking, and what will success look like for you? So Janelle, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I just want to echo a comment I made previously, that, we're measuring this for various constituency groups, not just students, but we need to make sure employees feel a sense of belonging too. So we create a culture and the conditions to have students feel belonging when we're providing services and supports to them. So we set out to define what belonging meant to the institution and how we were going to measure that. We conducted some surveys for our employees. We also did a pre and post survey of students who engaged with this particular virtual community to understand their self-reported sense of belonging and peer connectedness. I think there's a link already dropped to that research study, but we weren't surprised to learn, but it was very compelling data that could then be used as a use case and some evidence to build momentum around this is working and students are telling us they belong. And that is, I don't know how else to get belonging other than that self-reported, but we do look at if we're retaining them. So we're measuring, are they retaining? Are they satisfied? We do student satisfaction metrics. And then we're looking at outcomes. Are they completing their goals? A lot of it is qualitative research, I would offer. So even I get a quarterly report from your community administrator that's really helpful. And I share that out so people can see the qualitative student testimony that shows us that they feel belonging in their own words, whatever that means to them. They feel like they belong. And I think it is elusive to measure because it's not like a clear formula, but it's very qualitative work and it's very much personalized definitions of what it feels like. I was referring to Jeffrey Cohen's text on belonging, and he defines it as 3 things. And I learned this in March of 23, but help students feel seen, which our community platform achieved that. Help them identify their own potential. We've talked a little bit about this competence and confidence building, and then help them understand they're not alone. And so we kind of took those ideas to say, let's just create those conditions. And now I'm seeing a lot of qualitative input. We're still looking to measure completion outcomes as it relates to this implementation of this virtual community. But we are using direct and indirect measures, relying heavily on student voice to understand if it matters to them.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Luke, jump in.
I'll go to the last question because we've not launched and aren't focused on those first 2. But I was asked last year, what's next for online learning? And we really put a strong emphasis on student support. And so based on the evidence that I explained to you earlier, but for me, I want to reduce the number of students leaving from fall to spring. So I've got very much a number in mind. And I think that this is one of the many strategies we're going to put in place and then measure it against the results. So I don't think it's a silver bullet. I'm not saying that, but I think it's a piece of a larger strategy, right? I think connectedness is a part of it. I'll say this, Janelle said this a couple of times about a part of their guided pathways. For me, a high number of our 85 fully online programs are technical workforce. So these are students that are getting their certificate of their associate's degree to go into the workforce. And those students want to find others in their field and connect with people in their field to share opportunities to learn from them. So there's definitely, when we look at why do you select a program and why do you select one of our colleges, there's some evidence to the need to continue that. So I found information about my program. I engaged with a faculty member at a virtual night about the program, right? So I think there's some evidence that we see even in student acquisition that says, well, but have we continued that? Is there a continuum to stay connected in your content area, in your subject area, in your technical area? You know, whether you're studying digital media or you're studying law enforcement or you're studying, operations and logistics. So I do think there's an opportunity to help people do career entry, because we also know that's a challenge, right? Janelle and I are also do micro-credential work together, and we know entry into specific careers is tough, and networks are still an important part of getting the job at the end of the day. So, I don't want to give anyone the impression this is just about helping our numbers and reaching our own outcomes. It's about reaching the learners' outcomes. And we know that, we all know this in our own personal lives. You need community to do that for you sometimes and to network you and connect you. So I would just say that as well. Janelle, I see she wanted to make a point.
I could talk forever with Luke, so forgive me, Katie, but We actually had employers asking, can I drop internships, job postings in our virtual community? And that was a beautiful thing when that happened, because then that is highly motivating for students to see that that next job or that promotion as a result of their educational pathways. So thank you.
Yeah. And it's also, I think, a great opportunity to think about how you continue to engage alumni as they've left these programs and they're now in the workforce. They become another resource for your existing learners as well. And so that creates, I think, another really interesting opportunity in this area. All right. Well, it wouldn't be a session on education and technology if we didn't ask something about AI, it feels like. So I do think this is a really important question. It's something that we've been thinking a lot about at Inscribe. And so I kind of want to put this out. We did say sort of general other areas of technology, but specifically, I would like to get your take on, as AI becomes more prevalent, and particularly, generative AI, where students can talk to a computer and have a conversation. How do you see that maybe intersecting or impacting some of the conversation we're having here around belonging? Janelle, you want to start us off? Oh, Luke came off mute.
Okay, look, I'll start because you probably have something far more impressive to say, but I was really excited that there was some light AI inside of the virtual community when we started. What we were using it was for some sentiment analysis. And then you could, it would train to identify basically around frequently asked questions or phrases. And so it could help students get faster responses. So in a very positive way, I feel like the AI, especially applied in this context, allows students more immediate access to information, especially when the campus might be closed or students are studying at midnight and there's not someone to call, that they could still access this community and get just-in-time information that we have validated using technology. We also use the sentiment analysis, like I said earlier, when we identify that there are students in distress. So we can identify that quickly and do outreach when otherwise we might not know that that student is in such a state of distress as an online learner, or they might not feel comfortable sharing that or have opportunity to share that with peers or a faculty member as part of our instructional model. So those are some very positive ways I think that it's helped us be more responsive and provide some immediate outreach to students when they may be experiencing distress. Luke, what do you think?
I don't know this is a complete AI feature, but I know it's connected, Katie, to the AI feature that's in the tool. Is I like the fact from an agency perspective that students can like other students' responses and vote them up. And then the tool will begin to service what the community itself has said are the most helpful answers. I also like from a student agency validation standpoint that our students then become the experts in the community, right? Because they really are the experts of our organizations. They're the ones navigating all of the processes and systems that we've put in place. And so I like that the community, which I think is aided by AI, allows our students to really have this kind of expert role, so we have an elite Yelper on our team, and I liken some of the badging that happens inside of the tool to that, right? To be an elite Yelper. And so that's one. I really want to lean into what Janelle said about the sentiment analysis and trying to find a student that's in crisis when we don't know it, and the availability. So the other item from the priority survey of online learners was the institution responds quickly when I request information. And I think the AI inside of this tool does that. It achieves that for us. So that's what I would say there. I'm excited about it. And again, I'm saying this all with the caveat that we're assuming that the AI inside of the tool or anywhere else where you're using it does not hallucinate. It's not making up answers, right? And so we're saying, yeah. Janelle and I'll just give that disclaimer for both of us as colleagues that we're doing that with the assumption that there's no hallucination of AI happening. So
yeah, and so just to give some context too is we've sort of taken the position of having AI be something that enhances human connection and conversation without replacing it. So to your point, we've been using it so far to connect you to solutions, but that solution was something that another human created or provided, and we want to highlight that for you. But this is obviously a very rapidly evolving space, so I think all of our perspective and kind of how we think about it is going to continue to evolve and change as we learn more. Well, this has been wonderful. I really want to thank you guys again for being here. I know we already dropped a link to the research study that Rio Salado and Janelle's team did, but here's a QR code and a link to that again. We can also drop it back in the chat. But more than, and sorry, we will send out the recording in a couple of days when it's ready. You will be probably getting an email from Fred on our team who will send it out to you, and you can ask any follow-up questions if you want with Fred. But moreover, I want to thank our panelists. I mean, I'm so inspired by the perspective that you and your institutions have taken around creating a truly student-centric vision of what you're doing and what your responsibilities are to that population. And so I just love that we get to partner with you and help support you in this journey. And so thank you again for being here with us today.
Such a pleasure.
I will say, no, we got to get to the thing. So that's me. Find me on LinkedIn or connect